and welcome to These Three Things. My name is Ben Morgan. I'm with the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications, and today, so thrilled and honored to chat with one of my dear friends, and I say dear friends, we've never met except for online multiple times. We were just chatting, and it's on our list for me to visit Norway or you to visit Calgary, one or the other, or both.
Yes.
Kjell Brataas from Norway. One of a really passionate crisis communicator and author, and that's probably one thing, Kjell, that lands with me whenever we chat is just your passion for understanding and for sharing. And so, if you would, maybe just a little bit of your background, who you are, where you're from, and kind of how you fell into this space.
Yes, thank you so much, first of all, for having me. I really looking forward to this. And like you said, I've been working with crisis communication and crisis management probably for the last 20 years or so. It started kind of by coincidence when Norway was hit very hard by the tragedy that happened in Asia in 2004 with the tsunami. And actually 84 Norwegians died there. And I was then part of a group that handled, first of all, the telephone support systems, and then we organized to be of assistance to a support group that was started. And I was also part of a small group that organized and planned for 2 visits to Thailand for the family members of those who died. And then I continued to work with crisis communication for various ministries. And I was also heavily involved in the terror attacks in Oslo and on Utøya in 2011 that I'm sure you all will remember. And I've been continued to research this topic because I think it's very interesting. I think there are lots of things we can learn from past events. And I've done a lot of presentations around the world. And like you said, I've written 2 different books and I'm working on a 3rd book right now.
That's so amazing, and I still love the story. So I was, of course, heavily involved in a leadership role during the Calgary 2013 floods, and I think it was about a year after the flood when I received this email saying, "Hi, I'm a researcher from Norway, and I'm doing this, and this is the focus, and do you happen to have any pictures of the Calgary Emergency Operations Center?" Which was it's a really fantastic EOC.
Yeah.
And of course, here's some pictures, blah blah blah. And I remember just thinking, wow, like the work that we were doing here in Canada, in Calgary, is being looked at around the world, and it was such an honorable moment. And then you and I somehow connected, and then we were just chatting, and then I'm like, wait a second, it's you. And I think that's one of the really neat things about this world or this space is where it doesn't matter where we are on the planet, we're all so connected, and learning and sharing and growing together is so important. So today, This book is really great, and it's a must-have for anybody who deals in emergency social services, crisis communications, crisis management, or even if you're in a leadership position of a municipality, a government, an airline, a rail company, whatever it is, totally applicable. And we're talking about the human dimensions of disaster. What do you mean by that, Kjell? What do you mean by managing the human dimensions of a disaster?
Well, that's a big question, of course. And I think, first of all, the main point for me, at least, is that it's very important and vital to always think about people first when there has been a disaster. You really need to focus, of course, first of all, on those who have been directly involved, who have been directly affected. But there is really a really wide group of people who will be affected when a disaster has struck. And in my book, I try to explain quite detailed how you can read about this, what you can learn from other events, and most importantly, maybe how you can prepare. Because in my opinion, there is quite a lot you can do in advance within an organization or within a private company to be prepared for taking care of people if there is a disaster. For example, you need to think about where you can have a family assistance center if you need to organize that. You need to think about who will be the spokesperson, who will be the person visiting the family assistance centers representing your company. And then later on, I have this timeline of what happens in the first days, and then a few things will always happen within the first year. And then you also need to think about the following years and be prepared for things that you need to take care of after something has happened.
You know, it's a really interesting topic. Before I even found myself in this communication space, I was I was a paramedic for many years, and I went to Haiti. I think it was a week after the earthquake had hit the region in 2010. And man, you want to talk about the human dimension. It's so easy, especially in a response mentality, to look at the buildings that have collapsed, the infrastructure, the fires that are burning, to focus on that as opposed to not just the injuries that are in front of you, but the impact of that disaster that it's going to have on those people for years to come. I don't know that Haiti's actually still recovered from that earthquake. And, this isn't about me, it's about you. But I have so many stories about the people that I met when I was in Haiti. And what was really important to them wasn't necessarily what we thought was important to them. And so when we talk about managing the human dimension, I'm just going to throw it out here for me, listening to what is most important to your audience, to your community, to the people that are impacted. That's what resonates for me. But we're turning it to you because this is these three things. So if somebody were to ask me, Kjell, and they said, hey, I'm interested do you have any recommendations? Of course, you're on my recommendation list, but we're looking at about 350, 370 pages here. A fantastic read, always, when you get into a Brataas book. But what three things, from your research and from your perspective, what three things might we want to consider or think about in managing the human dimension in a disaster?
Yeah, I mentioned the first one, which has to do with just, thinking people first. And you mentioned it too, that don't look at the buildings, don't look at the fires, think about the people involved and think about the wider circle. My second point would probably be to be inclusive, to be sure that you include everyone that has a say in the aftermath of what has happened. And that includes quite a large group of people, actually. And I mentioned the people who are directly involved, who might be the people who have survived, or the bereaved who have lost someone. They might be bereaved who have also survived. And this is quite a large circle. And I believe, too, that when we're talking about being inclusive, it also has to do with a very large definition that I think we need for first responders. Because we usually talk about first responders, the people arriving in cars with blue lights on top. But in my research, I found that a large disaster will affect so many more people who are also kind of first responders. For example, doctors, for example, nurses, for example, ministers who are there to help people. And I believe actually even us as crisis communicators will sometimes be affected by the work we are doing or the images we are watching, and we too need some kind of follow-up. So I think that's very, very important. And my last point is that my third point is that you really need to have to be in it for the long run. And I mentioned this timeline, and I think it's very interesting to see what happens 1 year and the next years after a disaster. And there are a few things that always happen that you can prepare for. And one of them is, for example, anniversaries. We know that the date of when something happened is very, very important for those who have been directly affected. and they want to have some kind of a commemoration, maybe a service in a church, but very often also a service at a monument, if that has been built. And then we also see a few years later that there might be after action reports coming out, and that can also be like a trigger for those people who have been involved in a disaster, so you need to think about that. And even further years ahead, there might be court cases which sometimes take decades to appear, but that will also be a reminder. And in Norway, we have seen other types of reminders that come up after a few years. After the shooting on the island of Utøya, there were 2 different movies that were made. One of them is available on Netflix. And of course, that creates quite a lot of controversy among the people who have been surviving, or the people who have lost someone in that disaster. And so if you can, you need to prepare for that too, and at least try to be as helpful as you can, also in the long run. And actually last year, I took part in what was called a silent walk to commemorate a plane crash that happened quite close to where I live, actually. But that was 50 years ago. And still last year, they had a silent walk, and they had some people giving speeches, etc. And just a few, of course, of the bereaved family members who were there. But it showed that it never ends, and you have to be in it for the long run.
You know, that's a pretty big third point. There's a lot there to unpack. You know, as you were speaking, you know, I was reflecting on not just those that were looking to have a commemoration or to honor the past, but I'm thinking back to the Calgary floods, 2013. We had this significant flooding event in the city of Calgary. In 2014, there was a lot of fear. Fear is my home going to flood again? We've now seen the power of the river. We've seen the possibility of this river. We've been impacted. Oh my gosh, is it going to happen again? Not just reflecting on the previous loss about what I lost a year ago, but the fear of, is this going to happen again? Or you talked about the airline event. Am I fearful to get on an airplane again? You know, and what you're speaking about is so translatable. You know, think about a high-profile murder investigation or a significant motor vehicle crash where people have experienced loss. And to your point, it's all over the news. And then a year later, remember when this happened? Or it finally made the court case. And so there is that trigger on and on and over and over and over again. I think about, you know, I lost my wife after a long journey with breast cancer years ago. And I think about every year in Canada, it's called the CIBC Run for the Cure, where so many people across the country who have lost somebody to breast cancer gets together and they commemorate and celebrate and honor by doing this run and raising money. So, you know, it's we're talking about, you know, your book, the disaster, but that feeling and the importance is so translatable through so many different events, marriages, breakups, you know, people that have lost people to suicide. That anniversary date can be very, very powerful. And so, you know, how do we work through and help people through those periods of time? And I think you put it so well to your first point, be prepared and start thinking about it. So I know you just did a recent trip. I know memorials is a big conversation for a lot of people. You just had a fun trip where you were visiting some of these memorials around the world. You and I, we've both been to the 9/11 Memorial in New York. That is just, it's breathtaking. Just when I read, you know, you see all the names and you read the importance of each water drop that's falling down into this pit. It just so powerful. But then when you go downstairs into that museum, just wow.
It hits you.
Yeah. So out of all of them that you've seen, is there one memorial from an event that stands out to you?
Good question again. And like you said, I'm now researching a book I'm writing on monuments, and that will cover monuments from all over the world. So I've done a lot of research and done a lot of traveling to see them, these monuments for myself. I think one of the best examples, at least that I have seen, was I went in 2018 to visit a monument in California. And that's a very nice monument, I think, that is commemorating an airline crash that happened with Alaska Airlines back in the year 2000, when the plane crashed in the sea and 88 people died. And they did something very good, I think, at that time, because they got a person from outside to be kind of the middleman to negotiate between the airline people and the victims' families. And he was then in charge of organizing this monument that was built, I think, 4 years after. And it's on a beach that was very close to where people went out in boats to try to rescue people. And the monument is quite small, but very nice, and it's made like a sundial, so that the shadow shows what time it is of the day. And around the circle are the names of all the 88 people who died. And the plane went down in the sea at 4:12 in the afternoon. And when the shadow comes around to 4:12, it hits a small heart with just 412 on it, and then the name of the flight number. And I think that's very, very nice. And he told me when he brought me there that they have a very, you could say, popular event there every year on the anniversary, where they have speeches and where they come together and they sing and put flowers, etc. And that's one that really, really works in a good way. And it was not too expensive either.
Wow. That sounds you know where I'm going right now, the Google machine.
Yeah.
And so learn more about that amazing monument in Kjell's upcoming book. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, where do folks find Managing the Human Dimension of Disasters by Kjell Brataas? Where do we find this thing?
I guess the easiest is just to search on Amazon, and it's available there and in most bookstores, I think. So search for it online. Thanks.
So much admiration, Kjell. I've been saying to myself for years that I have a couple books to write. I just haven't got I just can't get there yet. So much admiration. And I think it's also important to point out for whoever's listening, this guy, this is his passion. And is it fair to say hobby?
Yeah, I could say that, because it's not my day job.
Yeah, like it's your passion spot that you do this. Like when you were talking about traveling and seeing all these different monuments, and in the past we've talked, and like, I'm talking to so and so, and you're all over the place. It's your hobby, it's your passion spot, and you do that. You dig in, you discover, you learn, you put it into a book, and you share it with the world. And so on behalf of all of us in this emergency management, crisis communications, people space, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do and the research, and for sharing your passion with all of us. That is Kjell Brataas from Norway, crisis communicator guy, and self-beautiful author on disasters, human monuments, etc. We should also point out while we're talking about it, it's never too far away, except I can't find it right now. Your other book, what's the other one?
That's called Crisis Communication, and that deals with 10 different case studies from all over the world, including a few airline accidents. Yes.
So there you go. If you're also interested, all you got to do is look up. I used to call you Kjell all the time. You were so polite never to correct me. But this is who you need to search up on Amazon or any of the bookstores for some great reading that will help you understand. Oh, and I got a shout out. I'm in this book, so make sure you track this one down.
That's the main reason to buy it.
Kjell, always a pleasure. Thanks for chatting and sharing your 3 things about managing the human dimension of disasters.